Okay, I'm going to show you something I'm really excited about. In fact, I'm more excited about this than anything else I've done on my channel because I think it'll make a big difference to a lot of people. I think this could be a big deal for a lot of people, and the reason why I think that is because typically when you're working with epoxy, there's a bit of a learning curve there. Because it's a two-part mixture, if you mix it by hand, you're going to introduce bubbles into the mixture, and you have to pop those bubbles usually with heat. And when you heat up the epoxy, you can run into problems with it setting sooner than you want to, or you could scorch it, ruin it, bubble it up. There's a lot of things that can go wrong if you're not super careful with it. Getting it level, setting up a rod dryer to get everything to dry evenly and to level out. There's a learning curve there that I strongly suggest that people work on that and get good at it, because there's some things epoxy can do that this stuff I'm going to show you won't do. For example, if you want to do transparent or translucent wraps, what I'm going to show you is not good for that, because it doesn't really absorb into the thread the way epoxy will. And let me just show you. This is a white wrap on a black blank, and you can see a little bit of bleed through of the blank color underneath, but there's not a whole lot. So you're not going to get your typical wraps to go translucent or even transparent. Another thing is epoxy does a better job of leveling itself than what I'm going to show you. Now this stuff does an okay job at it, but it's not perfect. You have to do a lot of the leveling by hand. If you'll use this little trick, you'll get it to skin over pretty quick, and then you can go set it somewhere to dry, and it doesn't have to be turned after that point because it won't continue to flow. If you look at epoxy, I've got a piece here that's cured. It's very clear. There's a bit of a yellowish tint to it because epoxy hardeners usually have just a little bit of a yellowish tint. And I can show you my bottle here. That's one bottle of hardener. I've got another one here. They're the same hardener, they're same color. Flex Coat makes really good rod building epoxy. This Flex Coat, the here that's dried, it's less than a week old, so it's going to be at its most flexible, and it is flexible. You can see it bends there pretty nicely. It's a little hard to bend, and eventually it will go back to its flat shape over time. So it's pretty elastic, and it does have some memory to it, so it will go back to its shape here in a little while. I'll just set that to the side. What I'm going to show you is very clear. I mean, it's glass clear, and you probably won't see it as well on the video, but there is no amberish hues to it whatsoever. Just looking at my screen here, it's really hard to tell. But this stuff is definitely clearer than the epoxy. I've got a glare on it and everything. It's very shiny like epoxy. But check out this flexibility. I mean, this stuff, it just immediately rebounds back to where it started. And I can sit here and bend it with pressure in half completely, put pressure on it, and it goes right back to where it was. That's something epoxy can't do as well, for sure. It's very abrasion resistant, and it's smooth and kind of glassy like epoxy. Epoxy's glassy, but there's a bit more of a tackiness to it, or a grippy feeling to it, than epoxy has. Epoxy feels more like glass. It's slick. There's no real grippiness to it at all, especially if your hands are wet or something. This stuff I'm going to show you is a little tacky, but not sticky. Stuff doesn't stick to it, but it has a grippiness to it. You feel like you could get a good hold of it and it wouldn't slide out of your hands even if your hands were wet. So I think it might have some uses also for a finish over grips. Not necessarily cork, but maybe something like a carbon fiber grip. If you're doing a carbon fiber grip, this stuff will give you a little tackiness that you want in a grip, so you can get a good hold of it even if your hands are wet, because it's more rubbery than the epoxy is. It kind of has a rubbery feeling to it, but it's very clear. It's smooth, very smooth. It's very shiny and reflective. And I got some information back from the company, and it is in fact completely UV resistant. It will not discolor, and it will not get brittle. It will stay elastic, and it will stay crystal clear. Whatever it looks like when you put it on, that's what it's going to look like even after it's been out in the sun for years. That was really good news, because that was one thing I wasn't sure about, and I wanted to wait to hear on before I kind of showed this to people. Now, because it doesn't have the same type of self-leveling properties that epoxy does, it does flow. It just doesn't flow as readily. You'll want to spread it out into a thin layer using a brush. You don't want it too thick. You want to keep it thin so that it fully cures. You'll want to spread it out and get it pretty even, and then do a few rotations manually to get it to even out the coating, to get it to level out somewhat. And then I'll show you a trick where you can set it. I'm just going to demonstrate and do a coating on this wrap. This wrap is this color off the spool, this color coated with Mod Podge. That's 2 coats of Mod Podge, and you can see that it darkens the thread a little, but it does a good job of sealing the threads, so we won't get that little bit of bleed through I showed you on the white wrap that I did earlier. Now I'm just going to drop some of this product on here. And I don't want to get too crazy with it because I don't want a super thick coat. I'm just going to rotate that around a few times just to get it flowing a little here, and then I'm going to start spreading it around. And the only reason I was rotating it there was just to keep it from dripping. I'm going to spread this around and get a nice, fairly level, even coat. You've got a few minutes to work with this stuff. And then when you get ready, you can set it. I'll show you how I set it so that it doesn't continue to want to flow around. We get some over here on this back side and some on the blank. And I'm not being real careful with this because this is just for an example. I'm not trying to make it perfect or anything like that. Just trying to get it on there in a fairly level coat so you can see what it looks like. Now I'm going to let it sit there for just a second and let it kind of distribute itself a little bit. And then I'm going to flip it 180 degrees and let it set for a few seconds. I'm also going to just tidy up these ends a little bit just with a piece of paper towel. I'm just going to rotate it around to tidy those up just a little bit. I'm going to let it set on this side so it can level itself a little on the top side. So the great thing is you don't need a rod dryer, and you can go ahead and put your coat on, set it the way I'm going to show you, and then you can stand it up in a corner if you want to, and it's not going to run and drip on you. You won't get any sags or anything like that. I think once this bottom side here starts to level itself out just a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and set that coat. I got it a little thick in this area. If I wanted to, I could drag that back this way. But I'm not going to mess with it right now. I just want to get it on there so you can kind of get an idea of what you'll end up with your finished product. I might go on the sides just for a few seconds to let it continue to distribute itself out a little more evenly. You're not going to get as nice and level of a coat with this as you get with epoxy, but it does look good, and it's super durable too. And that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and set it now. This is what I came up with. This is just a cup of hot water, and you probably won't see it so much in the video. Let me adjust that hot water is putting out steam. And I just had this sitting on a cup warmer, enough to where I could see steam coming off of it. You could put a cup of water in the microwave and heat it up. But this steam will set this product up pretty quick. And I know you're probably thinking, if it needs moisture to set, it's probably a polyurethane. Polyurethane does not do well with UV light, and because they said that this is definitely good material to use where there's a lot of ultraviolet light with no discoloration, no hardening, then I know polyurethane is not the major component of this. And that's pretty good, I think. That should do it. That should not move anymore from where it is right now. That looks pretty nice. That looks like epoxy. Now you wouldn't want to handle it at this point, but that little bit of moisture and heat will skin it over to where it can't move. So now I can take this rod off of here and I could stand it upright in the corner somewhere. Just stand it up vertically, and what I've put on there, it's not going to start to run down the rod. It's not going to move at all. It's where it's going to be. All I've done is just skin over the top layer enough to where it can't move. And that's the type of finish I get. There's no bubbles in this, and the reason for that is because I'm storing the bottle that it comes in upside down. If you don't store it upside down, when you first pour it out, there's going to be some bubbles in it. If you do get some bubbles in it, they'll be a lot larger than what you typically see with epoxy. And you can actually pop those bubbles with just a regular sewing needle. Just pop the bubble while it's still real fluid and liquid. And I don't know if you can see, I got really good lines here on the blank. They're nice and even looking. And that's just because I used the paper towel to kind of even those up some before the glue set up. And the coat is a pretty uniform thickness across the whole wrap. And it looks good. I mean, to me, that looks about as good as epoxy. It is not as hard as epoxy, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the strength of it. What actually is holding your guide to the blank on a wrap, and a lot of people don't understand this, the thread is doing all the grunt work. The epoxy is there to protect that thread. This is going to do the same thing. The thread is on, and this coating is going to protect the thread. Now I'm going to show you what this stuff is. And I tell you what, you can buy this stuff just about anywhere. That's it. That's clear Gorilla Glue. I know that sounds strange, and I would never put regular Gorilla Glue on a guide wrap. It tends to foam. It's a polyurethane glue, so the polyurethane glues foam up, and they do not hold up well to ultraviolet light. This is not a polyurethane glue, although polyurethane might be a component to it. I don't know. I was just told that it was a hybrid of this type of glue. You can buy this stuff at even grocery stores around here where I live at, sell it. If they've got a section that's got a little odds and ends hardware stuff with maybe a couple of screwdrivers and some adhesives and epoxy and things like that. If they've got a section like that at your grocery store, it's probably in there. There is another type of Gorilla Glue that is a polyurethane glue, and it looks clear in the bottle, but it's not called clear Gorilla Glue. You don't want to use that stuff either. But this clear Gorilla Glue is a special type of adhesive that has properties that seem like they should really do a good job for protecting your guide wraps. And as you can see, I can move this around and you won't see where this adhesive has started to run or drip or anything. If this were regular rod building epoxy that I normally use flex coat and I'd let it set for several minutes, it would start to run to one side, and you'd see that when I rotated it around, you'd see where there was a high spot. And this stuff doesn't do that. And after you heat it with your cup of water, it just stays put. It skins it over and it continues to cure from the inside at that point. But that's a nice shiny coat. And that wasn't a freak accident, because I did this yesterday and it came out with the same results. There's no color preserver, so you see just a little bit of the rod blank there kind of showing through a bit. But it really doesn't soak into the thread as much as epoxy. But I think that looks pretty nice. I like it. And I think a lot of people are going to like it, but just the fact that you can get it to set so quickly to where you don't have to worry about it anymore is a really nice feature of this product too. This looks like it's going to do a really good job, and I'm going to use it on some ultralight rods, and those rods flex a lot. I feel really comfortable with it for myself. It's very elastic. It bends and flexes. It's got a neat characteristic to it that is a little different than epoxy, in that I can dent it with my fingernail by pushing really hard, and it will actually indent it, but that indentation will quickly go away. It's almost like a self-healing type properties on it. So I really think this is something that I would recommend you at least experiment on your own with. Whether or not you decide to use it, that's up to you, but it would be something that I would take a look at. If you're building rods for customers, of course, you're going to go with the tried and true methods, but it might be something you want to mess with on the side and check out durability, longevity, and things. One other nice thing about this is if you need to rebuild a rod, or if you need to take a wrap off, it's easier to get this stuff off than it is epoxy. Now, it clings really tight to the rod blank. It doesn't just fall right off when you go to take it off. But because it's not as hard as epoxy, it's easier to get it started where you can get a thread started and pull the thread off. Once you pull that thread off, then there's not a whole lot of the Gorilla Glue left on the blank itself, and you can scrape it off with your fingernails. I wouldn't use anything harder than my fingernails because you might damage the finish, but you can get it to rub off, but it takes some work. I hope that makes sense. You can scrape and rub on epoxy too and get it off. It usually causes a little bit of an issue where you can see where you worked on the rod on the blank itself when you're removing epoxy, especially if you get one that they might have sanded on the blank at all before they put the epoxy on. But this stuff here, it comes off pretty easy. You're not going to have as much trouble getting it back off. That doesn't mean that the guide's not on there securely. I'll just show you here. This guide was one that I did yesterday, and I can pull on that, and I'm scared I'm going to break the rod blank, but that's not going anywhere. I mean, it's really on there because the thread's doing most of the work. The thread's doing all the grunt work. I think it would be just fine for any type of freshwater rods. I don't know about something heavier duty, like some big saltwater rods where you're landing very, very large fish. Maybe not in that case. I think anything freshwater like I do, you know, usually the biggest fish I catch would be somewhere in probably 10 to 15 pounds max. And the majority of the fish are less than that. I don't think you'd have any problems whatsoever with a rod using this as your finish for your threads on a rod like that. But something really big, if you're deep sea fishing and things, you might want something, you might want to stick with what you know is going to work, unless you just want to try this out and experiment on your own and see how it handles. If anybody does that, I'd like to hear about it, just out of curiosity for my own self. I don't do that sort of fishing, so I have no idea how it would hold up for that. But I don't think I'd have any kind of problems whatsoever with freshwater fishing using this as a protective finish for my threads. It looks great. It goes on super easy. It dries well enough that you don't need a rod turner really quick too, especially if you add a little steam to it. It sets up and skins over. It doesn't move around on you after that. And you know, if I was sitting here talking this much with a regular epoxy finish and it just kind of sitting still for a long period of time, it would definitely start to sag in areas. And this is not doing that. And you can see by the reflection of the light, that's a pretty level finish. I mean, when I first started doing epoxy wraps, I could not get my finish that level at the beginning. And that's something I got better with at time. But the learning curve on this stuff is so short. I've only done like 3 or 4 wraps just testing this stuff out. And the first one I did didn't look good because I didn't understand that it needed to be leveled out somewhat by myself first. So I had some areas that were higher and lower because of that. So after the first one, the second one I did, I had an idea that I needed to try to level it out first. And I did that, and then I rotated it for a while. Every few minutes I would flip it back and forth 180 degrees until it quit moving. And then I started thinking about it and adding heat to it. And that's when I did this wrap yesterday, this white one that turned out really nice by adding a little heat and steam to it. After I figured that out, I decided that this was going to be something that could be very useful to people. And then after that, I got an email from the Gorilla Glue company explaining that this stuff is in fact very UV resistant and it won't cause any problems. The type of glue this is actually used to adhere glass in outdoor situations a lot of time where there's different materials. So there's a lot of thermal expansion and contraction, and it's so elastic that it keeps a bond even in those conditions. So you know, on a fishing rod, it's going to be just fine. So if anybody does any experimenting with this, please leave comments below. And if you got any tips that you learn along the way, leave those comments as well. That way people can get some more ideas. I'm only showing what I've done. There's other people that are creative that will come up with different ways of doing things. Because this is not as easy to self-level as epoxy is, I don't think I'd recommend it for really long decorative wraps. I think it'd be best used for guide wraps. Straight from the bottle onto the guide wraps. That's about as easy, I think, as you can get. I've worked with varnishes. They have their hang-ups. I've worked with epoxies. They have their issues that you have to learn to work around. This is easy. It doesn't get much easier than that. I'm going to put some links in the description where you might go read about the type of glue that this is. If you'll study up on it, read about the characteristics of it, it seems like it should be a really effective finish for guide wraps for most rods, all the way up to probably like a heavy rod. You get much bigger than that, it could be an issue. I really don't know, because I don't have a lot of experience with those sorts of rods. If you do build saltwater rods, maybe you should just try it out and do some load testing and things on it and give it a torture test and see if you think it would hold up, because you know more about those situations than I would. You could get an idea quicker than I could about whether it will work or not for you. And I think this will work for a lot of people in a lot of situations. And I think it looks great. I mean, that looks fantastic, especially considering I've done this in the time I've just sat here. I was really excited about it. I wanted to tell people about it. This is the most exciting thing to me that I've come across since I've started doing my YouTube channel that I thought I could do a video on. That's how I feel about it. I just think this is something new that people aren't really trying yet, or if they are, there's not a lot of talk about it out there. I wanted to share with you what I found when I tried it And I would encourage you to try it yourself, because your investment is going to be $6 in a practice blank or something like that. You know, you don't have to use a good blank. You could play around with the glue for $6 or less, probably, depending on your store. If you do anything with this Gorilla Glue as a rod finish, please leave some comments down below and let people know what your experiences were like with it. It might save somebody else some trouble later. You might come up with a shortcut, whatever it is. If you like it, if you think it's a good thing, if you don't like it, and let us know why. All that sort of stuff is valuable information, and it's one of the reasons I like being on YouTube, is because you can share information and you can get feedback from other people that are trying different things as well. And it's just a good way to share information. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope some of y'all try it out. And if you do, please let me know. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do that. If you don't mind, I'd really appreciate it. That's all I got for now. Y'all take care.